still wake up sometimes, don't you? Wake up in the dark and hear the screaming of the lambs.
Hello all, and welcome back to Mind Juice. The clip you just saw was chosen to emphasize the idea and concept of trauma. As you can see, Hannibal Lecter, who's acting as a psychiatrist, whom understands how to get under and into the psyche of others, presses on her recollection of a traumatic event. You can view her facial expressions, the horror she is feeling by thinking back and reflecting to the evening she recalled the slaughtering of the lambs, the screaming. Not to be too dark, but I believe this is a great illustration as to what I intend on conveying in this episode. With that said, keep this in mind as I go along, for it underscores and clarifies what some are considering to be reasonable suspicion in regards to the surviving roommates, namely DM. This episode is rather deep, however, that is the intent and purpose of Mind Juice, to challenge minds to consider alternative, unique perspectives. Now, for anyone looking to better understand, dig deeper into the surviving roommates' statements and or actions the previous evening of November 12th, and further the following morning of November 13th, this episode is for you. Now, I want to be clear, I 100% do not believe that either one of the surviving roommates have anything to do with the horrific events being carried out. That is, BF and DM, I believe are in no way connected. I aim to provide rationale behind why the 911 call was not made at 4 a.m., and further attempt to show and explain away speculation that some within the social media realms have unfortunately misinterpreted, taken, and ran away with. Now, I pondered whether or not I would or should upload this particular focus, however decided to go ahead and do it as I feel that some will find it insightful, and further speaking out up against the unfortunate narratives that have errantly targeted the two surviving victims. I do not contend I am an acting psychiatrist in this case, nor wish for you to perceive this as such. It is merely a deep dive into the reality in play here. If you enjoy the content, please like and subscribe. We have begun to build a great community here at Mind Juice. Let's keep it going. With that said, I appreciate the insightful conversations and comments that have been taking place. It is beautiful to bring so much diversity and alternative perspectives and experiences into one place. Let's keep it up. Using the facts, and the facts only, let's get into it. For what it's worth, I am not from Idaho and or have never been, nor do I know any of the parties involved personally. The PCA, we see noted. As part of the investigation, numerous interviews were conducted by Moscow Police Department officers, Idaho State Police, detectives, and FBI agents. Two of the interviews included BF and DM, roommates both inside the King Road residence at the time of the homicides. We know that BF's bedroom is on the first floor, DM's is on the second floor. First off, let's cover BF. In my opinion, what you see related to her in the PCA gives investigators what I consider to be details that assist in helping flesh out the structural timeline. For example, in the PCA, we see it noted that on the evening of November 12th, Xana and Ethan are seen by BF at the Sigma Chi house on the U of I campus from 9 p.m. to 1:45 a.m., returning to the King Road residence shortly thereafter. Further, BF also stated that Ethan did not live in the King Road residence, but was a guest of Xana's. We also learn through the private drive for Kaylee and Madison that is estimated they were dropped off around 1:56 a.m. back at their residence. DM and BF both made statements during interviews that indicated the occupants of the King Road residence were at home by 2 a.m. and asleep or at least in their rooms by 4 a.m., with the exception of Xana, whom received a DoorDash order at 4 a.m. Now, it is important to emphasize the reality still today, that is, both of the surviving roommates are in the process of learning how to cope with and manage their life's outlook going forward after the horrific events of that evening. Yet one of them, DM, has been singled out and has found herself at the brunt of a lot of suspicion. Is it reasonable? Is it grounded?
David, one of the surviving victims was not asleep downstairs as police originally indicated, but she heard voices, heard crying, and even saw the mass killer when she opened her second floor bedroom door.
Now, the way that clip was framed and expressed sets the stage for the rumor mill to flare up. It presents question, intrigue, latent critique indirectly in regards to DM. The remainder of this episode confronts this. I have observed a lot of hate, conspiracy, etc. Individuals attempting to call into question DM statements stated within the probable cause. Actions both during, after, and further leading up to the 911 call, which we believe took place around 11:58 a.m. on the morning of the 13th. Is it, at first glance, consideration odd that DM stated to have seen the figure clad in black, yet a 911 call was not made for another 8 hours? In my opinion, not at all, whatsoever. Hear me out. Reading between the lines shows otherwise. DM gives more specific recall of events as opposed to BF. Why? Because she resided in the second floor bedroom, whereas BF was further removed from the center of the action on the first floor. This, for starters, is the first perception where, in my opinion, DM is getting hung out to dry. Hearing Kaylee playing with a dog, hearing male speak, crying, seeing figure clad in black. BF simply gave a structural timeline. There's nothing to conspire about. Yet because DM gave the statement's description she did, she's blasted for it. Everyone needs to acknowledge that it is these statements that will be used in trial to help the jury understand what it was like in the house that evening. These are statements that we as the public should be grateful for. Yet somehow it has caused a lot to the contrary. Now, it is important to understand that she, DM, gave her account as to what she recalled happened after the trauma had already set in. That is, it was not until after she locked her door, went to sleep, eventually waking up, and then walking out and onto the crime scene wherein I believe she first realized and conceptualized what had actually happened. It wasn't at 4 a.m. when she saw the figure clad in black. Thus, she wouldn't reasonably be in the mindset to even consider calling 911, because she wasn't yet aware of the actual gravity as to what had actually taken place around her.
Still, the last thing you're thinking is that your friends have all been murdered. You know, you hear crying, you hear a scuffle, you hear movement. You're not going to think that everybody's been killed.
Taking a look at this article from the National Library of Medicine, Frontiers in Psychiatry, Memory in the Context of Traumatic Events. Trauma memories, like all memories, are malleable and prone to distortion. People tend to remember more trauma than they experienced, and those who do tend to exhibit more of the re-experiencing symptoms associated with PTSD. After a traumatic experience, intentional remembering, or effortful retrieval, and unintentional remembering, intrusive mental imagery, can introduce new details that over time assimilate into a person's memory for the event. Importantly, memory distortion for traumatic events appears to follow a particular pattern. People tend to remember more trauma than they experienced, a phenomenon referred to as memory amplification.
But I think trauma affects every memory kind of memory. So a person who's traumatized generally has trouble with short-term memory. And, you know, when you're talking to a person and you start to notice that, then you're very likely to suspect that there's trauma. It affects emotional memory by giving triggers to these adverse emotions. And it affects episodic memory, autobiographical memory, by kind of shutting it out. And by
Through process of reading between the lines, I believe it is fair to suggest that it was DM whom eventually first attempted to call 911. Why? Although the 911 call has yet to be released, we are all aware that a call was made by one of the surviving roommates' phones, and further have also heard that dispatch during the initial call was having trouble and issues understanding the caller, which is where I believe DM was attempting to speak, get her words out. However, her mind, brain, was still processing that she was in reality, conceptualizing, making sense as to what she had just walked out on and into. It was indeed as real as it gets. Understanding that DM was experiencing the initial stages of trauma setting in, she began to hyperventilate. and then passed out, leading to another friend standing by to take the phone call over. She was traumatized for just a short time before calling. She walked into the raw horror that had actually taken place, causing her to instantaneously flash back to hearing whom she thought was Kaylee playing with Murphy, someone saying, "There's someone here," and further, "It's okay, I'll help you," and of course observing the figure clad in black with the bushy eyebrows. Now, it is my interpretation that he did not see her. She wouldn't be with us today if he did. It was upon waking up, seeing the scene, this all came storming, flooding back into her mind, realizing how close, how vulnerable she actually was to being just another victim. Now, I personally spent 3+ years working at a psychiatric mental institution for children, ages 10 to 17, working with those suffering from a variety of issues to include depression, self-harm, self-image, etc. But a majority of the youth I worked with, counseled, were victims of trauma. Hence, I had a lot of training in trauma-informed care. Now, how does this apply to what I'm saying today? Hear me out. Due to confidentiality, I cannot disclose specifics of any case. However, I will say there was one experience I often reflect back onto. And in fact, upon first reading the PCA, reading through DM's accounts, it brought me right back to the specific exchanges with the youth whom I worked very close with. Without getting too specific, let's just say I can sincerely express this youth was faced with processing through and overcoming a very much similar type of trauma, both witness-wise, fear, survivor's guilt. I will not and cannot elaborate any further, and I ask that you please respect that. But do know that it would be a case some of you would be familiar with at this time, taking place just over a decade ago, receiving national coverage. Now, what I learned is that after having endured such trauma, the brain had undergone a neurological fight-flight type of response, which literally rewires the brain. It takes intensive therapy, support from loved ones, clinicians, for years and years afterwards. Yet all the care in the world will never completely rid the youth of this experience, resulting effect on oneself, etc. Everyday experiences from that point forward would out of nowhere present triggers. It could be the littlest thing, such as sight, similar looking person, a sound, a specific smell. Over time, the youth adapted and was able to implement appropriate coping skills, strategies, ways to manage said reoccurrences of the nightmares whenever it presented itself. In working with them, it was often noted via the psychiatrist to take into account the expressed emotions related to the experience tend to exacerbate, become more intense, more reflective as to what was processed after the event. That is, in the exact moment, one does not realize what is taking place. The animal brain takes over, and thus, it is not until after, upon reflecting, wherein they label, recall said memories, often projecting how they feel in the present, such as shocked, scared, full of fear, etc., onto and into the recall as to how they felt that day. I hope that makes sense. Let me elaborate, continuing on and off of what we do know within the context as to how this relates to DM. Remember in the PCA, DM stated she originally went to sleep in her bedroom on the southeast side of the second floor. DM stated she was awoken at 4 a.m. by what she believes sounded like Kaylee Gonzalez playing with her dog in one of the upstairs bedrooms. A short time later, DM said she heard who she thought was Gonzalez say something to the effect of, "There's someone here." Review of the records indicate that this could have also been Xana, as her phone indicated she was likely awake on the TikTok app. DM stated she looked out of her bedroom but did not see anything when she heard the comment about someone being in the house. Further, DM stated she opened her door a second time when she heard what she thought was crying coming from Xana's room. DM then said she heard a male voice say something to the effect of, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." DM stated she opened the door for the third time after she heard the crying and saw a figure clad in black clothing and a mask that covered the person's mouth and nose walking towards her. DM described the figure as 5'10" or taller, male, not very muscular, but athletically built with bushy eyebrows. Now here, this is where it switches and where there's so much misinterpretation. The male walked past DM as she stood in a frozen shock phase. The male walked towards the back sliding glass door. DM locked herself in her room after seeing the male. DM did not state she recognized the male. This led investigators to believe the murderer left the scene. Now here is a second perception where, in my opinion, DM is being hung out to dry. The PCA does not express that DM stated or described to have been feeling as though she was in a frozen and shock phase at the time of the events, seeing the figure clad in black. Frozen and shock phase comes as a note by one whom wrote the PCA. Take a look for yourself. Which is true and accurate, as she completes her interviews with investigators and or verbalizes her account of the previous evening. Because she at that time was expressing herself, memory, now through the lens of trauma. Yet, some have elected to interpret this and question, how could she stand in a frozen shock phase, then go to bed, wait 8 hours to call? Which leads to unwarranted suspicion. I hope you're following me. I'm not being too technical, merely sharing with you my understanding as to how the PCAs are crafted on purpose. If you remember, in the Delphi case, you saw the same thing take place when they initially drew up the search warrant for Ron Logan's property. Anything and everything they can do to make a warrant or affidavit more plausible on its face, they will do. It's a means to an end. Let me clarify. I do not believe she, DM, actually felt frozen and or in shock at the actual time, that is 4 a.m., even when seeing the figure clad in black, because at that time she didn't know what it meant, who he was, what he did. Yet when attempting to inform law enforcement as to the specifics, her accounts of the events, she at this point is now attempting to reflect back on something wherein her reflective lens is distorted and trauma-ridden. She now, given the reality she now understands, associates her experience with frozen and shock, picked up by the investigator questioning her. Now, DM is subconsciously acknowledging the reality as to how close, how vulnerable she actually was. This would traumatize anyone experiencing a reality this close to death. This aspect here, misinterpretation if you will, I feel is where many are taking it and running with it, leading to her being dragged through the mud. Let's look at the wording in the PCA closely. The male walked past DM as she stood in a frozen shock phase. This is a presumption written into an arrest affidavit specifically used to bolster the witness account, evoke the idea of fear, etc. At the time of the events, she was not in a frozen shock phase because she was not yet aware as to what yet had happened. Hear me out and I will explain why and how this makes sense. This is not my opinion. It's reading the affidavit, recognizing where described and stated is and where it's not. Remember, DM locked her door and then went back to sleep, only to wake up and walk out on. Now, what I believe proves this is the fact that she began to hyperventilate, then passing out while calling 911 upon discovering the actual reality as to what had actually happened. That is, after she went to sleep, woke back up in the morning, she realized how close she was to being another victim. This is where authentic raw trauma sets in. Her hyperventilating, passing out is evidence of this. All the facts we know as a result of the information to PCA, which is important to underscore, are interviews done by investigators after the fact. That is, DM's account, as we now understand as hearing Kaylee playing with the dog, hearing crying, someone's here, it's okay, I'll help you, etc., are all her words to investigators after police were on the scene, after she awoke from having passed out. The frozen shock phase was the interviewing investigator's perception or conclusion of her as she was amidst recounting all of this information to him after the fact, not intended to imply and or suggest that she felt that way at the time. Take a look for yourself. Look, all of her info says DM states, DM describes. Then we get a few lines that transition over and into non-direct investigator notes. Thus, trauma had already set in. She can never go back in her memory to the events of that evening at the point at that point without having to reflect through the lens of trauma. At the time, she did not understand the extent of evil that was prowling. She wouldn't have been able to fall back asleep. From the point police arrived, she was able to gather herself enough to speak with law enforcement. At this point, she was in a frozen shock phase. The PCA uses elegant words craftsmanship to justify a more heavy, incriminating eyewitness account, which aids to achieve a warrant, etc. If you look closely at the PCA, I'll pull it up here, the note she stood in a frozen shock phase was not precluded by DM stated, which is necessary, yet instead follows her direct statements. Unfortunately, although both roommates assisted investigators throughout the investigation, also both having their phones forensically searched after the fact, one of them is getting hate and ungrounded suspicion aimed her way. DM. Now again, I pondered whether or not I would upload this episode. For right now, as you listen, I can just imagine there are some of you seeing to begin to shake your head, utter out loud this reason or that reason as to how or why DM's actions were or are considered suspicious. I understand, but hate to break it to you, DM's actions are and were not suspicious. It is how they are being interpreted, then shared, and repeated. If we all want certainty that this monster, if he is the correct one, which I 100% without a doubt believe he is, off the streets for good, we all need to come together and stop the DM shaming. She is a real person, and quite frankly, has likely just experienced something 99% of us could not and cannot relate to. How do we think she is feeling about life and herself today? Does she feel like a potential puzzle-solving piece to catch this offender? She should, because she is. But I bet she does not, given the ridicule and speculation being strewn around. Some are perceiving that simply because she saw a figure clad in black, didn't call 911 at the time, was on the second floor, etc., justifies reasonable suspicion. I disagree. Now, for those that are on this wagon, suspicious of DM, let's be realistic here. You are insinuating the Moscow PD, Idaho State Police, as well as the FBI submitted a 19-page PCA affidavit approved by a judge leading to the arrest of Kohberger is all hocus pocus. Sorry, not sorry. It's not, and indeed it is fact. Now, people who want to speculate, well, I know DM's boyfriend and he's a sketchy character, or they speak of drugs, or she didn't get along with so-and-so, etc., or this one picture she has. Let me pause right there. I am quite sure every single one of us, including myself, all have at least one picture somewhere posted here or there that, if given a sudden tragic accident, could be strewn or misinterpreted by everyone else out in the world who are on the outside looking in. Let's be honest with ourselves. One may suggest it was drug-related and or you name it. I have seen it all. To go so far as mediums and psychics insinuating her guilt, fault, openly questioning or suggesting gender-related angles. Seriously? To me, this is absolutely insensitive and downright awful, sick, and distasteful. Get a grip. Did the investigators look right over her? Did they? The FBI, the nation's top behavioral analysis, they couldn't see it? The people in task force that keep you and your family safe each and every day, some of the best, might I add, in the FBI, worked this case tirelessly before apprehending the subject in 6 weeks. Sure, some may suggest they had to arrest someone due to the income lost to the local university or whatever. You really think that PCA, the consistent patterns of movement between the phone and the white Hyundai Elantra, is all fabricated? The touch DNA on the sheath? What's the aim here? Oh, that means he touched it, but it doesn't put him there. Really? Coupled with the consistent movements of what I just mentioned, I hope you're not selected for the jury. But if you are, let's all agree that Kohberger can move right in next to you. You must be okay with that then, right? I am. What's happened to us as a society? This investigation team deserves to be met with a warm applause. I think many are vastly underestimating the true reality as to what they achieved in such a quick manner. He would have killed again. he would have killed again. Chief Fry exhibited humble regard, laying down his pride and acknowledging he and his team couldn't do it alone. What an admirable display of character, in my opinion. With that said, doesn't everyone want this monster locked up for life or given the death penalty? DM's eyewitness account statement will play a major role in this case. She still has to live with the fact that she has to face this man on the stand and express her reflection to the jury. How do you think she feels about doing that now, given all the hate and the wackadoodle conspiracy going on? Seriously. Further, somehow there's a mass of people who think that Moscow PD, the ISP, and the FBI are all lying and covering up, despite the logically grounded abundance of evidence, whom elect to ignore rationality and common sense, wanting to play conspirator, pointing fingers at one of the most important pieces, DM, necessary to ensure this monster is kept off the streets. In my opinion, that's your right, your opinion, but I don't respect it one iota whatsoever. But hey, if you're content with your perspective, that's cool. Like I said, he can move right on in next door to you. Sound good? Sounds like a perfect fit to me. Now, I know and am aware of a majority of you listening and following don't subscribe to this or partake in any surviving roommate bashing, but I felt it important to address, I guess. This is not a movie. DM is a real person whom has experienced something 99% of us have not. And how dare we or anyone think they have the sleuthery or the psychic ability to contest otherwise? Now, what I bring up here is just something that I can't let go. I saw this TikTok of a medium contesting that Kaylee Gonzalez came to his window knocking, telling him she wanted to let him in on a secret, that she was killed by a backstabbing roommate. It has 25,000 likes. Speechless. Is this dude serious? Man sounds like he needs to check in with a psychiatrist himself. Further, she knocked on his window, then apparently he has the ability to now summon her whenever he feels like it. And I mean that in the most honest and sincere way possible. I'm not saying I don't believe in that sort of thing. To each his own. I am in no place to judge whether or not there isn't someone somewhere who has some kind of superhuman capabilities. But to ignore the facts, the PCA, and reason, and in turn point fingers with no actual physical evidence? Aye. Hypothetically, let's pretend or consider a circumstance she was involved. Does she look like someone in this photo here that was hours away from partaking in said acts? Why would DM give such specific statements, accounts to investigators if she secretly was involved somehow? Wouldn't she just simply state she was asleep? Did she fake the hyperventilating passing out later that morning as she or they attempted to call 911 too? Remember, it is on record that the dispatcher had a hard time hearing the first caller, which we understand to be DM, whom amidst her hyperventilating passed out, leading to another stander by to take over the phone call. She faked this? What about the 8 hours that she waited to call 911? I'll tell you, she didn't wait. She didn't call at 4 a.m. because she didn't know the gravity or true extent as to what had actually just taken place. Had he seen her on his way out, she would have been his fifth victim. It is her statements that give law enforcement and us the idea as to his path of travel, sequence of events at this time. If she was in on it, why would she provide this? If her and Bryan were in on it together, why would she give such an accurate description or as many details? Wouldn't she suggest an alternative race, or suggest he was wearing boots, or state that he had blonde hair, etc.? You get what I'm saying. It is my interpretation that he did not see her. She wouldn't be with us today if he did. It was upon waking up, seeing the scene, this all came storming and flooding back into her mind, realizing how close, vulnerable she actually was to being another victim. Now, for those of you out there whom are shaking your head, thinking there's no way you could possibly know, you're right. You're right. But what I do know is DM played a major role in the investigation. This is why the police first stated the surviving roommates were sleeping, and further, have not yet released the 911 tapes to protect her. Why is this so hard to see? To DM, I pray, hope you may find and maintain the strength you will very much need going forward. Do know we are the world, like the song. There are many that attempt to understand and refuse to ignore the facts presented to us in this case, because that's all we have. And that's all we should base our perceptions off of. With that said, rest in peace, Madison, Kaylee, Zayna, and Ethan. Until next time, everyone, take some time out for yourself. Indulge in some self-care. This is heavy stuff. You deserve it. Take care, everyone. Mind Juice out.